It's almost certain. Mercedes have got certain car issues and the Ferrari is very consistent. So unless one of those things changes, it's going to go all the way down towards the back end of the season in one of those flyaways. Hopefully Abu Dhabi decided on the last lap or something again would be good.
Yeah, it sure would. So another action-packed race. If you missed the excitement on Sunday, here's a quick recap for you.
It's lights out and away we go. Excellent start from Sebastian Vettel. Lewis Hamilton covers him and outside goes Max Verstappen. Looking up on the inside, Valtteri Bottas. What a start from Max Verstappen.
What a rental, guys. What was that?
Straight into the barriers goes Carlos Sainz and also Felipe Massa.
Unbelievable.
Go racing again, something's flown straight off one of the front wings. Sebastian Vettel's front wing.
So the World Championship leader in trouble.
Oh dear, Max Verstappen, no.
I just cut out.
Sebastian Vettel then pits, comes out onto the track behind his teammate.
Italy is turning out to be the stars of the day.
The plan is we want to attack before the Ferraris arrive.
Kimi's been passed by Vettel. He went straight on in the final chicane.
Now is the problem for Force India. Here comes Sebastian Vettel into turn one. Vettel down the inside.
Vettel driving like a man possessed.
What a move again from the championship leader. And he is up now into fourth place. Lewis Hamilton took pole yesterday, takes the checkered flag today.
Nice work, Lewis. Excellent race, mate. Walk in the park for you today.
So Lewis Hamilton controlled the diva of Monaco. I think I bet a few divas in Monaco, but that's another story. How did he manage it? It's such a difference between these two races.
Well, I mean, they're two totally different tracks. Obviously, you've got the high-speed, heavy braking nature of Canada. You've got the high downforce, slow-speed nature of Monaco. But I think one of the things we mentioned about the Mercedes in our first technical show about how it looked a very complex car aerodynamically. And we were actually surmising at that point, will that car be difficult to set up consistently at all different types of track? And you know, it's got even more complex since we saw it, you know, in that pre-season show. And I think that's what you're seeing. It's you know, it's difficult to set up, but also, you know, they're all under pressure. And you saw Lewis not get it right. He had a fantastic weekend this last weekend, but they're under pressure as well, so they've got to get everything right.
Okay, so will that be Mercedes undoing them? Because we talked to Ferrari in Monaco, we said, look, it feels like you've got a car that seems to suit almost every track.
I think they do. I mean, if you maybe strip away Lewis's win and pole, in performance, Ferrari were with Mercedes throughout the weekend. You know, we'll talk about that first crash, no doubt, first lap crash. But Ferrari, I mean, on pace, really, there's almost nothing to tell them apart. It really just depends on the individual situation at each race. You know, do you get a good start, a bad start? Have you got control of the tyres? And it's going to be like this throughout the year unless, you know, Ferrari lose their consistency or Mercedes gain their consistency.
Would it have gone differently, do you think, if Max Verstappen hadn't had his issue? And hadn't caught Sebastian Vettel, taken off his front wing, and then obviously had to retire himself?
I think, you know, Lewis would have been dominant, you know, because from the front he was leading into that first corner come what may, and I think he was going to drive away from the field and win the race. You know, actually I think the point Craig made is that Vettel's recovery drive, given they made the mistake of not pitting him under the safety car, which would have gained him a lot more time as well, was pretty, I mean, he was pretty quick.
Driver of the day, the fans all voted.
Absolutely. So I think you know, this 1-2 for Mercedes and we're back on song and dominating, I think that's not strictly the case. I think had they been up there, it would have been a good race. Who knows? I think, as I say, Lewis would have won it. But no, I think overall, I'd still say that Ferrari have a slight edge.
It's funny, isn't it? Because you always know when the leader's just pulling away because the cameras just focus on the scrap between third, fourth and fifth, and you go, oh, well, Lewis must be long gone.
They nearly missed him on the last lap, didn't they? They sort of forgot him to go over the line.
You're right. Could things have been slightly different, though, if say, I mean, I know you can ifs and buts and maybes, but Max Verstappen did look set for a really good race.
I don't think he was going to be on for a good race. If you look at Daniel Ricciardo's performance, he had a great first corner, as did Bottas. But I think both of them clearly slipped back from there. So if it wasn't for that first corner for Verstappen, I think Vettel would have been following Hamilton throughout the race, and that would just been down to chance who got the win. Obviously Hamilton would have had a small advantage. But I don't think that Red Bull, or certainly around somewhere like Canada, I mean Canada, it's all about long straights and acceleration. Mercedes are always going to have advantage with the power unit they've got. It was always going to be a good race. You saw that in their customer teams, who obviously had the upgraded Mercedes power unit and had fantastic performance. Red Bull haven't got that power unit advantage, so both of those drivers would have dropped back sort of behind the podium position, and potentially fallen prey to the Force India maybe.
Well, very nearly. And actually, when asked if he had fun out there, Daniel said, "Well, not until I saw the checkered flag," because actually it was a very defensive drive for him for much of that. Valtteri Bottas sort of running his own race out there.
Yeah, I mean, I think once the first corner was out of the way and he was in third place, he had to set about thinking about when the pit stop was going to be, when it's straight, how he was going to get past Max, and I think they would have done. I think on the pace they would have got past him. They'd have had to work out how they were going to do it. But by the time that had settled out for Bottas, it was a case of bringing it home in second place and looking after it. He was never going to challenge Lewis for the win, and in that situation, drive it round nice and carefully, keep it nice and cool, don't wear your brakes out. If something happens to Lewis, you'll pick up the win. If it doesn't, you finish second for the team. And that, to me, was just a controlled professional drive.
Which is, you'd expect nothing less from him, wouldn't
Absolutely.
you? There was, of course, that nasty crash in the opening lap involving Carlo and Felipe Massa. The Spaniard has subsequently been given a 3-place grid penalty in Baku for careless and potentially dangerous driving. Do you think that was justified? I mean, it could have been a lot worse, that accident, but somehow it felt a bit harsh on Carlos Sainz.
I think that initial contact between Sainz and Grosjean was just this typical sort of first lap stuff. It was he tried to cut across, didn't have space, they both swerved back in, hit each other. I'm not quite sure he really chopped across Grosjean in that first corner. We couldn't get a clear enough view, but it was one of those kind of almost 50-50 calls. The result of that obviously was a much bigger crash, and potentially one that we saw, I think probably remember back in the Jordan days, when I think one of the Jordans went into a salver backwards. One of the worst possible types of accidents to have. And both of the drivers were very lucky not to be injured in a crash like that. But I think because of the sort of first lap nature of that first touch, I think the 3-position grid penalty is a little bit draconian for what happened there.
I'm not sure you agree.
No. I'm not so sure. I mean, I think when you look at him going down to that second corner, Sainz moves once and moves twice, and he doesn't leave a car. And it's a short run to the first corner and to the second corner. Everyone's bunched up. You can't be changing. You've got to be aware that you're in the middle of the pack and that there's going to be other cars around you. And he sort of looked to me that he was moving totally, not thinking about the fact that he's in the middle of the pack and there's going to be other cars there. And so I'm not surprised to see him get that penalty, because he's caused a big accident.
Yeah, I mean, you sense with Sainz that he's so desperate to perhaps accelerate through the grid and to a bigger team, that he wants to prove these points, but maybe trying a bit too hard in that instance. I mean, poor old Felipe Massa, just wrong place, wrong time, wasn't he? I mean, there was nothing he could have done about it. Ironically, though, him being out of the race probably offered the chance to his teammate to secure points at his first ever home Grand Prix, which is a great thing for him and the team.
Absolutely.
Are you happy with that drive? I mean, you're not convinced about Lance Stroll, are you?
Again, I've not seen anything in him that shows them that he's an outstanding talent. He's certainly a competent driver. But watching the onboards, he just looked a step away from a big accident or being out of control with the car. And again, we look at the nature of the Montreal circuit. It's all straights breaking into chicanes. It really suits the Mercedes power unit. You had a lot of retirement, which we don't tend to get too much now in races. So I think it's a bit fortuitous to get points, but still I think the fact that he kept it on what can be a tricky circuit shows that he maybe is maturing and we're starting to see the better of him. But I wouldn't think that this is a step change in his performance through the season. When we get to Baku, it's a very different circuit. I'd be surprised to see him put a performance in like that again.
How much time has this young lad got to prove himself? I mean, not just to the team, but to the fans?
Well, he's probably played for a year to prove himself. So I mean,
at least, I'm sure.
Yeah. But I mean, I get what Craig's saying. I mean, this needs to be a kickstart for him. It was his home race. He would have been under a lot of pressure. He did deliver. He didn't make mistakes. Yes, he was sort of on the ragged edge, but he still got it in the points, and he passed some people, and so give him credit where credit due. But he needs to go on from here now, and he needs to start finishing races. He needs not to find every accident that's going. So he needs to improve from here.
Well, hopefully he can build from that. Now, we saw outright lap records fall again in Montreal. 7 races in. Are these 2017 cars just delivering more and more, and actually exceeding expectations?
I think they're still a little bit
Sceptical look in your
I think these cars are still under-delivering. You know, we saw the big change to the cars yesterday with lots more downforce, but the tyres aren't sort of keeping up with the cars, and we've seen often, you know, the cars aren't as quick as last year unless the tyres are working. We was on the softest of possible tyres through the Montreal weekend, and we did see some fast laps in arguably a race where, because of the high drag of these new cars, you wouldn't expect Canada to be a place where they did set lap records, but they have. But I still think there's a lot more potential in these cars if we can get the tyres sorted out, because you shouldn't be able to run as long as lots of those drivers did on an set of ultra softs that have done qualifying. That's just completely wrong. They should have been absolutely worn out after 10-15 laps, not running 30-40 laps into a race.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point, because you had the bigger tyres, you've got the more downforce, bigger tyres. Everyone's saying lap times are going to tumble by 4 or 5 seconds. Yet every race we go to now, you're running on the ultra soft tyre. There's no tyre choice to be made at all, because that will last half the race. And I think, you know, it's fair enough when you go to a new tyre formula with the tyre manufacturer, they're deciding a year ago, you know, the spec of these tyres, and they're always going to be conservative because they don't want to get it wrong. So, but I hope now that for next year and that they push on and we get some much softer tyres and more aggressive tyres. But I think in general the formula has worked. The cars are pretty good, and I think the fears that we had about overtaking and that haven't really. I mean, it's no better, no worse.
I think that's certainly equal this season. We didn't have problems around Monaco with the sheer width of the cars, but you know, I don't think
Pascal Wehrlein might have another thing to say about that. But
well, he set his car up to be very narrow at the end, didn't he? But
that was a heart-stopping moment. It really was. I mean, I, for one, as a race fan, do enjoy going into a race weekend not knowing how the drivers are going to be able to handle it, because you just don't know. Because they talk about them being physically that much more demanding and having to wrestle them. The fact that Toto Wolff was calling it a diva at a race like Monaco actually quite excites me, because what's going to happen next?
It's good.
Who knows? Well, one of the standout performances of the day once again came from Force India with 5th and 6th, but could it have been so much better if they'd swapped the cars? So Esteban Ocon could have had a crack at Daniel Ricciardo's 3rd place. How would you have played it if you were in the hot seat?
For me, it was absolutely obvious what you had to do, in that they had the strategy where they'd run Esteban longer. So they knew where he was going to come out. They knew he was going to come out behind his teammate, 4 or 5 seconds behind him. And at that point, you say to Sergio Perez, he's going to be up with you in 4 or 5 laps because he's got better tyres. You've got 4 or 5 laps to get past him. And if you don't, immediately let him through and let him go at it straight away. And you have to do it straight away, because that's when he's got his maximum advantage on his tyres, because he was on the super soft. Ricciardo was on the soft, so always as it went on, the advantage was going to switch to the Red Bull. So you had to let him go straight away. And the team orders in that situation are absolutely clear. You know, you've got to get the best result for the team. You say you've got 4 or 5 laps, then let your teammate have a go, and if you can't get past, we'll swap you back, and that's it. And that's just why they didn't do that straight away.
That was going to be my question to you, Craig. Do you think actually it's to do with the dynamic between the drivers? Because Sergio Perez has really kind of bedded in as the team leader. He's much more experienced. Esteban Ocon is this little upstart coming in and ruffling feathers. And was it the team kind of perhaps not stating their authority over their lead driver enough?
I mean, I agree with Mike. I think they definitely had to stamp their authority. It's not down to Perez during the race to say, no, I'm not going to do it. I'm going to follow this guy. And his post-race interview was quite bizarre. It's like, I followed Daniel all afternoon. I thought I have the right to try and overtake him, and I don't think that should be the case. So if you've had the whole race and you've not managed it, it's not going to suddenly happen. And they threw it away, and I think they do need to have an agreement within the team, as most teams do, between the drivers, with this trust that you let the faster car through, and if that doesn't play out, then you swap back. I mean, lots of teams do. Toro Rosso in particular have an agreement like that.
I mean, I mentioned it in every team briefing for every race. You mention it because drivers won't do it. They don't like doing it.
Well, why would they?
And because the problem, but Force India definitely on the radio were very, very meek and mild. They weren't saying this is what you must do, which they should have been doing.
I think things will start changing now, because Esteban Ocon has really proved himself this season, and perhaps even Perez will say, well, look, fair play. No, that's not going to happen.
And ultimately, it doesn't matter what team orders you have and what you say. If the guy on the track doesn't do it,
I know.
There's nothing you can do about it.
We've seen it time and time again. But do you think that Ocon had anything to complain about with Sebastian Vettel's pretty aggressive move on him, which forced him off the track?
No, I mean, it's motor racing.
Yeah, that's a typical last few laps sort of manoeuvre. It's on the edge, don't get me wrong. But, you know, Ocon shouldn't have been in that position, really, you know, being stuck behind his teammate. And, you know, potentially, Force India could have lost a lot more points than they did, when they could have been potentially even looking at a third and fourth if, you know, Perez could have slipped by Ricciardo after Ocon had. So, you know, it's a team game and the drivers have to play their part in the team.
I have to say, Esteban Ocon was so mature beyond his years in the post-race interview with Rachel, very calm, and said, you know, my time will come. So
I mean,
hopefully it will.
I always used to say to the drivers, if you don't do what we ask, you know, we've got loads of ways of changing it around when we want to in future races. We've got loads of ways.
I don't doubt you for a minute, Mike. You quite scare me. It's a little pitbull, isn't he?
So do what we ask, because, and I think Ocon's been sensible. He hasn't got involved in it. He hasn't got in a spatter. And I think the team will look at that and say, you know, one to him, and when the time comes, we'll look after him.
Very true indeed. That's all we've got time for in part one. Do join us after the break, though, as we look at how long McLaren's relationship with Honda can actually last, and the news that Robert Kubica is targeting a return to Formula One. Welcome back to the F1 Report. The Canadian Grand Prix saw the return of Fernando Alonso after his break to compete in the Indy 500, but it was the same old story at McLaren. Engine issues in P1, Alonso in the points, until more technical issues forced the Spaniard to retire with just 2 laps to go. Zak Brown said McLaren can't just sit around and wait for things to come good. So just how long is it going to be till they split from Honda?
Well, the rhetoric's changed in the last race or two, hasn't it? Very, very much. Both pre-race and post-race. Quite critical rhetoric, you know, and you know, it just sounds like that a decision's been made, and they're fencing around how they're gonna sort of tell it to everyone. But there's been a big shift there, and Honda just don't look as though they're getting worse, if anything.
It feels imminent, doesn't it? What are their options, though? Is Mercedes' spare engine one of them?
Well, I think this sort of concept of Mercedes of spare engines sort of sitting around is not quite how things work at Brixworth. But yeah, Mercedes would be the obvious choice. It's arguably the best power unit. They're very good with their customers, and politically it would fit in very nicely. The other options, what, a Ferrari engine? I can't see a McLaren Ferrari. And equally, you've got a Renault supply, which is not arguably a direction that you want to go. So it has to be a Mercedes, or they will have to just tough it out with Honda.
And just how easy or difficult is it to adapt a chassis to a different engine like that?
Well, I mean, Mike knows better. I mean, it's a big job, but the Honda to the Mercedes is probably a smaller jump than it would be from the Honda to the Renault or the Ferrari, which are very different engine layouts internally. Obviously, everything has to change, the cooling, the electronics, the hydraulics, but in terms of the physical layout of the engine, it's a smaller job going that direction than with one of the other manufacturers.
I think for teams, you know, for doing a car for next year, knowing that you're going to do it, it's not particularly a big problem. And I mean, and that's why they want to be gearing up. They want to know. They might not announce anything, but back in the factory, they'll want to know, and they'll want to be working on it now.
And that'll be a shot in the arm for the team, won't it? At least there's light at the end of the tunnel for them. I mean, they'll be getting to work on it now, wouldn't they? If it is going to happen by the end of the season.
I mean, absolutely. But yeah, I mean, you know, at the end of the race, Fernando was again looking feisty, trying to score some points. But I still think the chassis needs some work on it. But
well, I was going to ask you, how good is that chassis?
I think it's very difficult to know, isn't it? Because you just don't really know how bad is that engine. I mean, you watch it in Canada along the straights. You see Fernando, you know, absolutely driving the socks off it. You know, and he's driven 2 fantastic races in the last sort of 2 weeks, and had an engine blow up 3 laps from the end in both of them. So it's not going to go any quicker than that. But how much is it? You know, it's very difficult to tell. But it would be a huge lift for them, and whether that's good enough to keep the driver, who knows?
Yeah, because you've got to wonder if it was a mediocre driver or anyone less than Fernando Alonso, they wouldn't be anywhere near the points, would they? I mean, he's really running that ragged and fighting it.
I think you'd definitely argue that. I mean, obviously, Van Dorn is a fine driver. No one's got any doubt about his talents, but clearly he's struggling. And it's a difficult year, so it's hard to tell. And Alonso really sort of maximises this. But again, I agree with Mike. It's very hard to tell how good that car is, because when you've got an underpowered car, it can flatter the chassis because it's not being thrown around as much. But equally, you have to compromise so much setup. Because you've got a down on power engine by taking the wing off the car to reduce drag, that it wouldn't be as good around the corners as it should be anyway. So, yeah, it's tricky, and it's almost impossible to know where the drivers will go.
Well, do you think that change in rhetoric will be enough to keep Fernando at the team? Because at least if he feels that Zak's got his back and he's making changes, can he stay? Will he stay?
It's a big ask.
I guess there's nowhere else for him to go at the moment.
Exactly. The whole point is where's the guarantee that it's better? If it's a Mercedes or a Ferrari seat, then but anywhere else, where's the guarantee that you're going to be better?
Do you think, is it possible that they could go to Mercedes for a year and then back to Honda if Honda get themselves sorted out?
I'd love to see the contract negotiations for that one.
That would be a bit of a minefield.
Everything's
What's
possible.
in that for Mercedes?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's very true. I feel that the Zach Brown relationship is really crucial for Fernando Alonso at the moment, because you feel that there's an understanding and a respect there, and you feel actually that Zach Brown's listening to him. By doing the Indy 500, that was at least bought him some time with the team.
I mean, I think that would be one of the key things that would keep Alonso there, that relationship with Zach Brown. He's kind of wrapping the team around it. He's letting him do IndyCar. There's talk of McLaren doing Le Mans, which obviously is Alonso's other big target. You could see could be a relationship there that goes beyond just driving an F1, which Fernando may find attractive. The other options, maybe going to Renault or somewhere, may not be enough for him. Maybe he'll just pack up completely and just go off and be a gentleman driver and race where he wants to race.
Absolutely. Okay, well, on a much happier note, we bring you news that Robert Kubica is targeting a return to Formula One after a career-changing crash. The Pole completed more than 100 laps in a private test for Renault.
First of all, I felt like a kid. It was a special feeling for me, but on the other hand, I got very quickly back what I have. First of all, I felt like a kid. It was a special feeling for me, but on the other hand, I got very quickly back what I had. I think when I was racing in F1, the feeling was good, and also it felt like being back at home. So for sure. It's kind of a new start for me. I don't know what it will bring, but definitely it's a nice feeling to know that I can drive F1 car, and after such a difficult period and having my limitations, to know that I can drive the car, I can drive the car on good pace, and I can drive the car for entire Grand Prix distance. It's something which makes me happy, proud, and for sure, once I have done this test, I would like to test more, but that doesn't depend only on my side, but I will keep working, and hopefully one day I will have a chance to go forward and step by step maybe have proper comeback.
Music to every race fan's ears, isn't it? I mean, he's a truly popular guy and a true talent. Can you see this happening?
I would really love to. There's lots of sort of hurdles that they have to jump through, both sort of commercially and obviously on the physical side for Robert, but it's possible. And I think it would be a good story for Formula One. It'd be a good story for potentially the Renault team, and bring a big degree of interest back into the sport that obviously waned when the Pole left the sport because of his injury.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the physical side of him, we'll have to wait to see how he fared, because it was all to do with the movement in his hands, wasn't it? Yep. But in terms of the track that he tested on, you know that Valencia test circuit very well. Just tell us about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite a tight, twisty track. I mean, 115 laps around there, you'll know about it. He's certainly got to use, a lot of lock on the steering wheel, a lot of gear shifts. But it's a private test, and that's very, very different from being competitive when you're racing. I mean, I knew him from when he drove before. I mean, he's a lovely guy. And I think everyone at the time, he was someone who definitely had it. He was a future world champion. He was going to do it. So I think if he can make a comeback, that would be great. But really, whether physically he really can, as opposed to just driving one reasonably competitive, he'll know that. And I think he mentioned, you know, that there was some. He also he had great fun. He also discovered some of his limitations. Whether they can get around that in the car and work with it, and I think, as Craig said, everyone would love to see him back and competitive. But if he can't be that, I wouldn't like to see him struggling either. You know?
You don't want to see him come back if it's not right.
But it's just great that he's tested and he's enjoying it, and hopefully he'll do more. That in itself is fantastic.
And obviously there is speculation over Jolyon Palmer's future with the team. Is that a coincidence that this is happening at the same time?
I don't think so. I think this test is one of those long-held things that Enstone had promised Kubica after his accident, that he could come back and test. I mean, wouldn't it be great if he could finish this half of the season in Jolyon's place? Obviously, not
for
deliberate.
Jolyon.
Not for Jolyon, obviously. But I think that may be an option. But I don't think that was the politics behind this test. I think it was very much just a gift that had been due to come and collect for many years.
And very much deserved. That is all we've got time for this week. My thanks to Mike and Craig for joining me. We'll be back in just a couple of days' time to look ahead to the Azerbaijan Grand Prix in Baku. Bye-bye for now.